We're pretty much, how about you three wonderful folks introduce yourselves and then we'll do names for the 8 years.
Wait, what?
Tell us who you are and get along with you.
What's your name?
Hi, I'm Allie. Nice to meet everybody.
And you are?
I'm Anita.
Rockstar.
Rockstar. That's right.
Second best, but right up there with AE.
Yeah, something like that.
All right, my background is yes.
Yeah.
All sides. Go ahead.
Ellen, Madden, and education.
Noel, that hurts.
All right, and you?
I'm Drea, and I'm.
And what?
No.
Did you say that loud? All right. Well, so much for introduction. Thank you. The rest of the AE.
They're all A.
Start out, Dalton. Just holler your names out.
Dalton. Brian. Blake. Shane. Mike.
Alice. Griff.
Locke. Peter. Daniel.
Hey, ready? Student workers.
Eli.
Charlie.
Right, so that gives you an idea. It gives me great pleasure today to introduce Jim Stuckey, who's going to introduce Daniel.
Oh, I didn't know I was going to be Daniel. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Daniel Grillo, formerly from California, currently somewhere between Seattle and California because he's moving to Seattle and stuff is all up and down the highway. But he's keeping up with his work wonderfully. I can't wait. That's all I know about today.
Wonderful. International man of mystery.
No, that's perfect.
Today, we are going to be talking a little bit about the alignment of mission statements. And to answer your question and also to kind of segue into my presentation, I would like to give you just a little bit of background about myself as well. I started out within outdoor education, like a lot of us, at an adventure camp. And my particular one was an offshoot of a more traditional summer camp with bunks and cafeterias and all that. Mine was the wilderness offshoot, so base camp was tents and kids did their own cooking and such. Moved on to my collegiate university outdoor education program, which was under athletics. Moved on to REI within outreach, so doing outreach and events and in-store programming for REI in Texas under a large retail organization. Moved overseas to Outward Bound Singapore, which was under the People's Association at that time, which was a government ministry in Singapore. And then from there moved back with REI as a senior instructor with the outdoor school in the Bay Area, and now working as a program coordinator with them up at headquarters. And so all of my structured time within outdoor education has been as an employee of a larger subsidiary, which has been an interesting process for me. And I think it's something that a lot of us need to start thinking about as we start thinking about what the missions of our representative organizations are. So before we even dive into the presentation, can I check how many educators, adventure educators ideally, do we have in the classroom right now? And if you take your students outside, you can totally consider yourself. Oh. Everybody, wonderful.
We try to wrap them all up.
I know, we're inclusive. How many of those people are supported by a larger organization? How many of your organizations are supported by a larger organization? Or are you independently funded? So public institution totally supported by a larger organization, right? Yes. Anybody else? No? Only a few. Wow, wonderful. Great. Dalton, thank you. All right, why don't we go ahead and proceed on to the next slide. So why am I even interested in mission statements in general? I think that in general, they provide great context when we're making decisions. So especially for management in any organization, they need to refer back to kind of a mantra when they are asking themselves whether they should form a partnership with an organization. They also indicate a unified direction. You can tell that for a lot of us, it's easy for us to talk. And that sends us off into tangents and all different types of directions. The mission statements kind of pull us back together, and they give us a unified purpose. Kind of that we're all fighting towards the same goal, even if we approach it from different angles, especially organizations that do a lot of different things. Maybe service learning with outdoor education, with in the classroom education. All those things, they can still be working towards one mission. They also provide insight to external parties, and I think this is something that we can all sympathize with. When people ask you what your master's program is about, or what your thesis is about, you're ready with that 30-second spiel, that 30-second advertisement, that 15-minute critical collection of information from the 145 presentations. We're ready with really short answers that represent bigger ideas. And that's what mission statements are for people. So if I'm applying for a permit in U.S. National Forest, they might look at what the mission of my program is before they decide to give me that permit. Because if my mission is to make lots of money, then they charge me a different rate than if my mission is to encourage environmental stewardship. If you want to go on and proceed to the next one. What about mission and AE? So how many of you all, you can close your eyes if you feel guilty about it. How many of you all roll your eyes a little bit when you think about mission statements? A little bit? Yeah. So this is my challenge in advertising this presentation to all of you, and I thank you for attending. Because this was my challenge as well. I often, working for all these organizations and getting blasted with multiple ones from each employer, because I was not only getting mine, but also the larger employer, it was out of sight, out of mind for me. And I think that part of that is because we have this dearth of really well-articulated mission statements out there that are concise and that are clear and that are unique and differentiate programs from one another. There's a lot of jargon thrown around. Peter, Socha, and O'Connell actually found that these types of mission statements that fight all those trends actually are correlated with longer-lived organizations. Maybe they can form more successful partnerships. Maybe their employees know more about what their organization actually means. All of those things contribute. They also help. When I'm talking about mission and AE, I'm talking about how the mission of an outdoor program can correlate with the mission of that larger institution. And the more integration that we have with academics also has shown correlation with success in outdoor programs. That can mean funding. That can mean the accessibility of those programs to the students. It can mean the longevity of those programs. So the more that you can integrate with your parent organization, for this presentation we're mostly going to be talking about colleges and universities, it has value. So don't ignore that parent organization that you're working with. This is the next slide. A lot of these, this thesis, my second reader made a joke about thesi, and he said that theses are written to a 5th grade reading level, which means that you have to define every single word that you're using. And so rather than provide a very specific definition of mission statements, I'm going to just provide for you a couple bullet points that maybe you can keep in mind because you might have an activity to do in a little bit that will require some understanding. So they indicate a sense of purpose. They involve concrete concepts, so they're not pie in the sky out there intangibles. They encapsulate a self-image, so that's that clearly articulated and concise bit of advertising. And they're also relatively stable over time. You may have been in an institution that went in and locked themselves into a room and rewrote their mission statement. Has anybody been part of that process? Was that an easy process to do? Denise doesn't count. She's a rock star. Everything's easy for her. But Peter, Alice, no?
It depends on who's in the room.
Perfect. Cool. So for sure, it can depend on who's in the room. They often, they're kind of a snapshot of the political, historical, social context that mission was created. So they may change if that context changes a lot, but they're relatively stable over time. So an organization that's focused on environmental stewardship probably isn't going to be focused next month on nothing but revenue. Another common confusion is with vision statements. Anybody also equated those before in the past? They're another eye roller sometimes. They talk a little bit more about ideal futures, and they're often immeasurable. I'm going to read you 2 examples, and I'd just like you to vote for me. We're going to put our hands up if we think that the phrase that I read is a vision statement. And we're going to leave our hands down if we think that it's a mission statement. Okay, so hands up for vision. So, blank will be an internationally recognized institution for our scholars and students who work in and across disciplines to create knowledge and transform paradigms.
You want hands up if it's mission?
Hands up if it's vision. That peer pressure is working. Well done. That is definitely a vision. How about, let's compare that with that same institution's mission. Blank is a leading research university with a tradition of innovation in the education of students built on values. So a little bit more concrete. You might be able to read through some of those course descriptions and see if values are integrated into those. And it's present. It's not talking about in the future we plan to be this. Right? So it's lunchtime. I got blessed with the after lunch crowd. Those calories are digesting and slowing down our metabolism. So we're gonna your room has already been divided neatly up into 3 groups. and we are going to play a little game. I'm going to give each one of these three. I know, I'm sorry that you two are together. That wasn't intentional. I'm going to divide you all up into 3 groups, and I'm going to give you a task. It's going to be noted on a card here, and I do want to emphasize that it's non-competitive. But I would like you to elect a representative to come up and present your group's solution to the task once you're done. I can hand out note cards if you'd like to scribble on note cards. I've also got whiteboard markers if you're more of a whiteboarder. That is fine. And can I also ask, before we do this, can I have everybody to close your laptops and turn your phones on airplane mode and turn off your Wi-Fi for a second, because there can't be any cheating. I don't want any external references to the interweb. All right? So, group 1.
I want the other one.
Yeah. Peter, can you be my
Am I allowed to read it?
forward?
Look
Not
at
yet.
it? Okay.
Only when group 2 and group 3 have theirs.
Oh, okay.
Good cheating.
All right. So why don't we get into a spot where we can all read those note cards? Everyone within our group. All right. And let's flip them over and go about your task. You've got about 5 minutes to complete this task. Okay. So you can come from yes, you can come from eight.
Can you define that one for me, please?
So, 2 of us need to write down the full mission of both, whoever's AE organization it is, and then the parent institution.
How many of you even said that you have parent institutions?
I do.
You do not?
There's no chance
Cool.
Can you talk outside?
How about you two? Do you both work with any organizations?
Does everybody know what a player
I can check in with them if there's one. I mean, is
So I
that,
can give you an example of what I think I understand. So I just got hired on to do the bid facilitator at UCSD's challenge course. So UCSD would be the institution and the challenge course.
Perfect. Bon. Yeah. Excellent. Or the leadership program or whatever, if it's part of an AE program, whatever program. So if we want to just do one, that's fine. That means the pressure's on you.
When I got in.
Don't mess up.
No? And you work with the museums, but do you work within a special wing of that? Okay, and you don't have a separate mission.
I went through the science department as a separate mission. No, mission school.
Because you don't do separate training with your students?
So we can guess, right? Do our best job guessing.
Write it down. We can reference it. Try and write down what you think your missions are for both of you, at least for your organization.
Like what would develop leaders? Usually it's like develop leaders from one
Are we reading?
Put up back the characters.
Just guessing it, yeah, just go back and forth.
University.
It's gonna be the same as
Inspire.
prepare.
Global citizens.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. So this is a fun variation on the challenge. So now you're writing UCSD's mission.
Yeah, but do a good job. Don't mess up.
What did you say?
Learning
or learners?
Inspire
lifelong learners.
Learners.
Or maybe experience
Whether
And what did you say? And global citizens?
Yeah.
And global citizenship? Learn.
There's that mission I rolled.
Yeah.
So is this the schools or is this your program?
Okay,
UCSD, okay, cool.
okay.
And then how about for your program?
I don't even know if there is one. So, Outback Adventures, I think is the
What kind of questions would you ask if you were going to write a mission statement?
their anticipated outcomes are.
Sure. That's fine. Right. Especially because they talk about real-time outcomes. You might also look about the full breadth of programming you offer. So what are the methods you're going about reaching those outcomes? Populations that you serve.
So there's UCSD, and there's the rec center, and there's Outback Adventures, and then there's the challenge course.
There you go.
So which one do we want?
I don't know, which one do you think has a mission statement you can find online and verify?
Well, I'm guessing that the challenge course probably has like a value, like a value proposition written somewhere.
Or your personal use.
But sometimes like.
Sometimes I feel like there's like an in-between mission statement,
Right.
like sub-mission statement, which is like to support the mission statement of the overall university,
Sure.
X, Y, and Z.
You can write down if you want. If that one's easier. Because I'd like you all to try and check out to verify yours before the time is up. So you've got about 2 minutes left. Maybe we can do one of you wants to borrow a computer or use your phone to do a little web surfing. See if you can even see if it's even possible to find UCSD.
UCSD challenge course.
So group 3, you're all solid? And who's going to group 3? Yeah, you folks all right? You got it.
We are nowhere near ready. Get away.
Get away.
Yeah.
The diagram or whatever it is of like the mix of your organization makes a circle of what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and your resources and your mission statement. There's not
I know who you are.
a way to
I
put
just don't know what you're reading.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
Or your golden circle.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Good.
so we all set?
That's definitely a negative.
Oh.
Well, interesting. Spend the last minute, just try and find it. Maybe you can help, maybe help Brenda find it on the website. All right, so let's start to make our way back to our seats groups. Group 1, can we grab a seat? Okay.
I hope we can
This is
make
frustrating.
You're awesome.
All right,
We got it covered.
so can we go back to the game time slide, please?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and invite up, who shall I invite up first? I'm going to go ahead and invite up group 2. Can I get a presenter? Let's just first I'll front load them through no fault of their own. We gave them the challenge, but they only had one employee in their bunch that worked with an organization that even had a parent institution, but they had a little trouble recollecting their mission statement. So.
Yeah, we didn't even know if there was one, because like
Mhm.
UCSD is a huge university, and then it goes to the recreation center, and then it goes to this thing called Outback Adventures, and then it goes to the challenge course. So it's kind of like a mega example of this. And what did you just find? What did it say?
So for the UCSD or for challenge course?
Challenge course had kind of like a mission statement,
It was, the challenge course really, it details who the challenge course serves, what it offers, and then what is a challenge course. It doesn't design to develop communication and teamwork through challenging activities.
Cool.
The
Perfect.
focus.
That's great. And how about the UCSD one?
University of California, San Diego is a student-centered, research-focused, service-oriented public institution that provides opportunity for all. Recognized as one of the top 10, 15 research universities worldwide, a culture of collaboration sparks discoveries that advance society and drive economic impact.
Well done. So clear and concise mission statement. Wonderful. So why couldn't you remember that? Great. Let's have group 2. Well, you were group 2, so let's have group 3 actually come on up and give your presentation. You can maybe read your challenge out to the other groups so we know what your challenge is.
Sure. Ours is share with the group a recent, within the last 1 or 2 years, decision that your organization made that directly reflected its mission statement. I guess my situation was sort of relevant because I started an organization in January, and when I did so, I sort of began with the mission statement to sort of align my mission, I guess. But then as I started developing the infrastructure of the program and started developing more what exactly it is going to entail, I had to continuously reevaluate the mission statement to make sure that it included all aspects of what was going on.
Yeah.
So when it came down to it, I realized that there were keywords that needed to be included.
Mhm.
I kept adding keywords, and so it got to a point where I had to stop because I
we get a representative from group 3 to come on up?
Oh.
Okay. Our challenge was to come up with a mission statement for an AE organization. All of you must agree to its phrasing and priorities. The agreement part, we were good. We were very. This is our brainstorming web, and we started to try to write it over here. But so this is like we just kind of what do we have in common? Well, the three was living in Southwest. So that's where we start. Because that's where it is. So we're all educators, and we all feel like the connection with the place is very important. So off of these three things, we just kind of went, okay, what kind of connection? Nature and culture. Okay, what kind of education? How do you facilitate the education? Through experience, through exploration, through reflection, multi-directional learning. And what do we want the participants to get out of it? So that's, and then we started to try to write it over here. But we could make it.
After the class.
Yeah.
Thank you. So keep these exercises in mind while we advance through to the next presentation, or the next parts of the presentation, and we'll come back to them about why they're important. The paper that I'm actually going to be presenting was a miniature research project, and it started out with looking at the missions of a number of different collegiate outdoor education programs around the country, and comparing those to the missions of their parent institutions, and looking for overlap. The way that I found my samples, I started out with Bell, Holmes, and Williams' 2010 census, which was an outdoor orientation program, so a subset of all the schools in the country that may have outdoor education programs. I had a couple other stipulations. They had to employ non-student staff, so that eliminated just the outing clubs. They had to involve year-round programming, so not just a spring break trip or a summer trip program. They had to have a clear mission statement online, which scratched a lot of them, as you all found looking for yours online, and that means it is called a mission statement, not just randomly sourcing among many paragraphs of text on the website. And this gave me 54 total programs that I could look at. In order to code these and look for overlap, I used James and Huisman's Welsh study from 2009, and this was a really interesting study where they looked at business schools in Wales and tried to find common themes amongst their missions that reflected the geographic or socio-political issues of that particular part of Wales. So I took those and then I consolidated them because they had a lot of categories, and then I modified them for adventure education. So I just changed some of the wording to fit more our kind of program. I masked the program so I couldn't see which program or which school was what next to the actual mission. And then I coded the thematic elements. So I went through and I would take words out and I would say, this one has these three elements in it. I did this twice. This is for some of that validity and reliability tests. So I didn't find any errors or issues with either coding, and part of that is because I picked very specific sentences from which to pull those elements on the next slide. These were the examples. I'm sorry if the text is a little small, but you can see that the mission elements were divided up into 8 primary elements over there: diversity, personal growth, intellectual development, environmental awareness, spirituality, social development, creativity, and personal growth. And a sampling of some of the words that would fall under those categories. Perfect. So this is the results of just the frequency count. So this is just the counts of all of those thematic elements. You can tell there are 3 obvious strong winners here, both within Adventure Ed as well as the universities themselves, and those are, in no order, personal growth, intellectual growth, and social development. That gives me some hope. Our education system is working towards some pretty wonderful goals. You can see that there are also some that may have different meaning to different folks here. Spirituality, diversity, creativity, and personal growth that showed pretty low numbers, if not in the universities, then also in adventure education. On the next slide. This next graph represents the number of overlapping elements. So this means elements that were represented both at the parent institution and at the same institution's adventure education program. You can see that there were a healthy number of those 54 programs that had 0 overlap at all. So none of the same themes of their missions. So the bulk of them had 1 and 2, and only a handful of them had more than that in terms of the overlapping elements.
This is just overlapping language, is that correct?
Correct, it's overlapping themes. So they might not use the same word,
Okay.
but it falls within the same theme.
The way you coded it on that.
Correct, exactly.
Okay, I see. Thanks.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, can we go to that
Yeah,
overlapping?
sure. Do you want to go back one slide?
My question is, those are the ones that have overlapping elements, which
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
But they might have only one overlapping element, but no non-overlapping elements. How does that relate to non-overlapping elements?
So
We don't know.
we don't have a count of non-overlapping elements. We don't have a count of. I have a count of total elements, but I just didn't put that graph up. But that's a good question. And that's actually one of the implications for further study is to try and weed out organizations that have a 2-page long mission statement, because that's easier to find overlap within those than a mission statement that has 3 elements.
If you have a parent organization, theoretically, are you trying to have on the submission statement?
I'm glad, because you're segueing along the exact lines that we want you to be. You're thinking ahead. So the quality of that overlap. This is actually indicating which elements had that overlap, which elements demonstrated it. And again, no surprise, those really strong ones were personal, intellectual, and social. Again, some of the ones that again may be meaningful for some of us are pretty low on the rest of them, except for those big 3, pretty dismal actually, in terms of the number of overlap. You can also see that the standard D for this one was pretty small as well. So what kind of implications does this have? Thank you. This is getting into what Denise was talking about. Seaman and Gas kind of argue that we've specialized a little bit too much. As an industry, we're losing touch on some of those bigger goals that are things that, if you think about some of the things like the themes of our colloquiums, right? They're representative of these really big holistic ideas. And sometimes if we get into these really specific programming, really specific missions and fragmentations, we can miss some of those. But they also write that intentional integration within schools is a way of self-preservation of our industry. Right? It's not just a way of getting funding, it's a way of transferring participants, it's a way of getting legitimacy, it's a way of developing our own staff and our own personnel. Morphew and Hartlett also write that having common elements don't relegate programs to ambiguity. So I love that this group tried to come up with their own mission statement. And some of these terms may be somewhat generic in terms of when we think of mission statements, but they also might have legitimate, real personal value to the people that came up with them, right, to the schools that they represent. I think that when we zoom back to your individual activities, I'm going to kind of break them down. The first group that we had here, your challenge was to remember your parent organization's mission and your personal organization's mission. And so this is kind of the first level of what I call awareness. So being aware that your organization has a mission, it has a purpose. The second level was looking for a recent action of that organization. Maybe it's a partnership. Maybe it's a decision in the last talk maybe it was a decision to cut a certain number of schools out of the school system. But to find your mission reflected in that decision. And I call that recognition, because that's recognition of your mission in action. Right? The last level over here is what I think is honestly the hardest, and I think that it's reflected in our ability to really nail those first two, and that is communal integrity. So when we affiliate ourselves with an organization as an employee, as a student, are we being honest with ourselves that we have fully embraced every part of that organization's mission? Because I think that's a pretty challenging thing to do. As passionate outdoor people, we may be really passionate about conservation. We don't really care that much about teaching people how to play outside safely. But if getting people outdoors safely and turning them into environmental stewards is part of our mission, we need to figure out how to embrace that and bring a little bit of that part of our mission into our programs as well. So do those three breakdowns kind of shed a little bit of light onto why we did those individual activities? Awareness is the first level. If we're not aware, we can't even reach the next level. Recognition is looking around when employees ask, why did management do this, or why did this happen, or why couldn't we continue to run this program that's been so successful for us in the past? Take a look back at your mission. If that may actually shed some light on why a decision was made. It can be eye-opening. And the last level is really asking yourself whether you fully buy into those beliefs and those individual parts of the mission. So it's not important that every element of the missions overlap necessarily. But I think it's an interesting perspective and lens through which to tackle it. So if you want to go on to the last slide. These are some of the considerations for further study. So one of them was part of the question that you asked Denise about just the length of mission statements. Is that reflective of how unified that institution is? So a massive school that has 7 different colleges under it might have a much more diverse mission statement. And to some degrees that's justifiable. But it can also bias our thematic element count, right? So it's a lot easier to come up with something in common. And also just the breadth and depth of mission awareness. I think this is something that's really interesting. I'd love to ask outdoor educators to recite their mission. I've been part of organizations that were very mission-centric, and I've also been parts of ones where they knew that they were getting people outside and that was it. So does that knowledge differ as you go down the line? Because I would argue that the folks that are making the field decisions, it's critical that they know it. It's also critical that the management folks know it so that they're making organizational decisions. And it's critical that the institutional colleagues know that as well, because otherwise they just think of us as the outdoor folks, as opposed to as the stewards of the environment or an extension of the athletics and wellness program. So it's important that we represent ourselves well. On the last slide. And if you have any questions for me, we've got about 10 minutes left. And I do have a resources document. It's a public Google Doc template, which are templates are the only ones you can make public now. So you can search for Daniel Grillo QP references handout, and you'll find just a brief abstract about the study, as well as a list of references. Thank you.
So you just said at the end about people memorize or knowing and being able to recite their mission statements. What have you come across in the past? Because and maybe are you interested in pursuing that idea? Because it is a really, as funny as mission statements can be, I think it really is important for people to know them and how seriously they like that.
My interest is definitely in employees and employees of outdoor education. I don't know how much I'm going to continue with mission, but I know that even this study changed the way that I kind of interacted with mission within my own program, and I recognized that there were parts of our mission statement that put off a lot of our instructors, and they were instructors with us because it was a solid job, it was well paying, it had a good safety record, and we have a wonderful diverse range of clients, all those benefits, but they didn't like the fact that we were affiliated with a retail organization, and so they would, if they were asked if they worked for REI, they're like, I just work for the outdoor school. And I think that being able to embrace what your organization does, and maybe even taking a look, what does REI do, and why should we be proud of that? They do sell gear, but that's certainly not all that they do. And if we don't, then we're shortchanging parts of their mission as well. So,
and just to add, how would you encourage people if they don't agree? My school, for example, I do a lot of it, and some of it I'm like,
sure.
And I'm teaching there, but how would you encourage people to embrace those parts that are difficult for them?
I think that that's the part that we can do as when I think of myself as a really passive activist. I think that choosing your employers and influencing them where you can is really important for that. So if there are opportunities to revisit that mission statement and you feel that there are parts of it that are really solid or facilities that are solid or locations that are critical, then volunteer to be a part of that changing process. But if there are parts that you are diametrically opposed, then I think as a passionate outdoor educator, we often need to question whether we are fulfilling our personal mission as much as the rest, and whether there's another organization that offers a better opportunity. I'm never going to encourage somebody to quit a job or anything, but it's a values versus. There are presentations at 1:45, so if we don't have that many.
So I'm hearing you say that your sub-organization doesn't necessarily have to match your parent organization.
Yeah.
And you believe that?
Yes and no. I don't believe that it has to have 3 or 4 elements in common. I also conducted qualitative interviews with either sides of the bell curve of this sample. So some of the biggest programs in the country have nothing in common with their larger parent institution. And I will say that the common refrain from those organizations were echoing a lack of understanding between their organization and the university, and a lot of disputes about funding and partnerships. Whereas the ones that had 3 or 4 solid elements were generally relatively progressive institutions as a whole that had a big focus, and outdoor education was a big part of their institution. So I think it's easy to see how they had less conflicts about those issues. But so it is possible to exist as a valuable and great student resource at a school without common elements. But I think that the management are going to continue to face challenges unless they work to integrate at some point with them. I also heard some great kind of foot in the door strategies for starting that process. Some of it can be fighting to make outdoor education to have some outdoor academic credit, maybe within a business school application for a leadership program, or for another great example would be for a lot of the science classes that it provided a means for traveling safely through terrain that allowed students exposure to incredible learning opportunities. So there are ways of integrating, and I think that those actually bring your missions closer together. Does that require the same mission statement? Not necessarily, but I think that it does. I think that especially if you're receiving funding, or you're receiving free facilities, or you're receiving marketing materials that are coming from that parent organization, then it is important that you embrace it. Embrace, I think, is a more important word than copy some of its mission elements.
Because I wouldn't be worried about having 2 or 3 or 5 elements the same.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be more worried about how many elements are different. Like if it was all different going into a totally different direction.
Right.
For
Yeah.
me, sort of like, then why is that your parent organization if your missions aren't?
And I think that's a really interesting idea for another study. I don't think that it would. I don't think that it addresses the parent and kind of subordinate relationship between those organizations and institutions. I mean, the fact that so many of these organizations rely on their parent institution to even stay afloat through subsidized programming, or again, like through facilities, through insurance purchases. I mean, it's unbelievable. The cost of any of you that run independent programs know the cost of running a program versus the cost that you can charge a participant that they're willing to pay for it. I think that we one great way of integration is showing them that we are providing value and contributing to their overall mission too.
One more question.
You've all been challenged.
I have another.
You're allowed.
So back to your beginning when you got done with the board, how did you pass the net before? I mean, I know it was universities and colleges, but I mean, that's still huge. How did you start?
I think Bell and Holmes' original study had 130 plus or 180 plus. There were a couple other big school programs that I knew about that weren't on that list because we don't have outdoor orientation programs. And so if they met all those other stipulations, then they were included. But that was the list that we started with.
Have there been? I'm sure there have been. I think I kind of answered your question. I don't ask any questions. But have there been studies that have done with employees that are more versed in the mission statement and know it better than, say, other employees, and then delivering a better product, whatever that product may be,
Yeah.
than those that are unaware of the mission statement?
I've not read anything like that within the world of adventure education.
I'm sure some businesses must have conducted that.
Well, it's interesting. The majority of the literature that I found on adventure education missions was about writing one. Was about starting a program and how to write one, and working with things like you mentioned, like the Golden Circle and the kind of objectives and resources and audience and all those things. But they do not have a lot on empowering your employees to understand them. They certainly don't have a lot on training your employees to embrace it.
If every OB employee could recite their mission statement, and those are kind of like, I think on my own, I don't know what the mission statement is. Like, would they have better programming than, does that translate into?
Better is also
Yeah.
Right. So would they receive better evaluations from their students, or would they reach their objectives?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those would be really interesting studies. I think that if you look at OB programs just as in the U.S., you'll see a huge variation in the way that those programs are implemented. But they're targeting different audiences, and theoretically, those program managers that are designing those programs have an understanding of OB philosophy and are trying to reach those outcomes with their population and with their resources. Some OBs in the U.S. have full-time development directors that get donations from public donors. whereas some are part of an umbrella organization that that has kind of a bigger pool of money. So all different. I mean, all these things actually can impact the individual missions of those different schools, because even the different OBs in the U.S. have different missions. So to a degree, those could even be considered, the parent in this case would be the philosophy of Outward Bound, which they also are assessed regularly to see if they can even maintain that. We have international visitors come and ensure that they're still achieving OB goals. And then the individual mission would be your school and why it's unique and special. So you're getting into some of that awareness and recognition levels of how this can actually play a part, but how it doesn't pigeonhole you into just a drone of your larger institution.
When you were doing like looking in the literature and stuff, did you leave AE and look into different?
Jim can vouch for this. All of my studies are pretty much outside of AE.
Because I'm thinking about like Howard Schultz and Starbucks, right? Like
Exactly. So most of my, I mean, the wealth of scholarly literature in other fields besides AE is huge.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of this whole program is about integrating learnings across fields. So it's great if we can do that pull from ED, from ES, from humanities, but it's also great if we can pull from fields that I think are underrepresented in AE. And the big one that I have been exploring with a lot of my classes has been business, and how those are related.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Any more questions? You can always feel free to email me or check if that reference is in up. So thank you all for hanging around, and you just made it in time.
Very good.